Hi all, I have yet another amazing game from Gibraltar to show you. Please excuse my backdrop. Gibraltar is famous for its monkeys, and I have experienced them actually when I went there to play once. So it is a tourist attraction there. So topical, I would argue. E4 from Federico Perez Ponsa against Nakamura in round 3. The Caro-Kann by Nakamura, who's a multiple times champion, by the way, of the Gibraltar Festival, if you didn't know. Knight f3, bishop g4. Now this system has been used way back by Fischer before the 1970s. Some very interesting games with this two knight system, and here white does gain that light square bishop, but black is pretty solid here. G6. G6 is a bit novel, by the way. Let me just touch on knight f6, which is the main move in Chess-Based Live Book. This continuation has been seen quite a bit. You can see black's got a really solid position, a bit like a Fort Knox. He's got rid of his problem bishop, but white has a small edge. I think really it's to do with the e5 square here and the bishop here that white, you could argue, has a small edge. But so this is slightly novel, g6. Now castling might not be the most testing. Actually no, castling is fine here. It's in this position, rook d1 to prepare d4. Computers indicate here that it might be quite exciting to just sack a pawn, believe it or not. If you look at black's development here, sacking a pawn, this position is pretty dangerous. In fact, knight takes d5. This is a computer line, I just want to show you. This is extremely dangerous. The threat there was rook e5, so for example rook e5. So this position is critical where this fianchetto is really tested, but black, I think, with best play, plays knight c6, and this is just crazy. Yeah, it's a bit crazy stuff, and it ends up with white having a big advantage anyway. So there's a very, very exciting idea of a gambit. It isn't used, and that's a bit of a turning point for me in this game here with rook d1, because now it's as if black is able to gain a very dominating position with d4, gaining space with little downside really. It's a really aggressive pawn chain now. White tries to make the most out of the c4 square for sure. Queen g3, a6, but even that, black's going to be expanding on the queen side potentially. This e5 hitting the bishop, and now rook b8 for b5. So really this space advantage in the centre, I think, makes me question if that gambit was pretty interesting, especially against a higher rated player. They say to sort of make things more complex. This seems to be a sort of one-way street where black's increasing the space advantage here. Now after f4, bishop h6, pinning the pawn. And now taking on f4, you might think this is a little bit dangerous, but is white in a position to exploit these dark squares? In return, black is getting that very powerful central square here, so knight e5, and the knight really, it's often a comfort to black. It's safeguarding key squares, and now the exchange of queens is offered. That's rejected. b4, and the knight is miserably going back, so big space gains here by Nakamura on the queen side. Very, very committal. This very awkward looking knight on b1, and this target now on d3 immediately has to be defended. f6, which rules out any rook f6 from white. Queen d6, knight e3, knight c2. Yeah, black is really in the driving seat here. Knight b5, queen e7, rook f5 to f2, rook a8, and then the knight goes into e3. You can see that this is just wonderful now, this entrenched knight. It's a great position, these knights, for black. White is being totally tortured here, and you know, it's very, very passive, very, very passive position. And now here, f5, knight d2, queen c7, which sets up some dangerous tactical ideas already, which at some point might work, like knight g4. At the moment it might not, because the king could go to h3. It's almost like winning the queen. So the king sidesteps away there. By the way, on knight f3 check here, there's rook takes f3, protecting the queen. Or just queen takes f3. So that's not a tactic there actually. So anyway, king g1, but it's a sort of safety precaution to take it away from the glare of the queen here, this x-ray. So f4. Now this is interesting, f4, because you might think, well, what if rook takes f4? In the game, queen h4 is played. On rook takes f4, actually there's a nasty pin. Can you see what black can play? Nasty pin on this diagonal. 5 seconds to pause the video. Black could play knight takes d3, so there's a pin against that queen, and so black would just be winning the exchange there with a big advantage. So after f4, that's a poison pawn. It can't be taken. Rook e to f8, bishop e2. Now this is really awkward, by the way, because there's also a possibility of queen a5, which is really dangerous. But if, say, knight f3, this was still good with queen a5. This is still good because the queen is like infiltrating here and tying, white down. So black would have an advantage even in that scenario. But this has to be factored in now by white. And here it's just very awkward, queen a5. We have queen g5 counter-attacking this knight. Because if this knight moved here, there's actually the knight's holding the rook. And it's only with this mechanism that you see that the queen's protecting the rook. But actually this can be nudged. The whole configuration can be nudged. Can you see in this position, if you were playing black here tactically, you could play g5. Yeah, trying to nudge the knight away from the rook or the queen away from the rook. In either case, for example, queen takes, we could then take on f3 and then take on e1. So this is just too dangerous to play knight f3, it seems. So queen g5, and Nakamura takes, and here rook b1. If rook a1, it's not great because a queen takes b2. Yeah, this is just too dangerous. For example, like this, and that's a pass pawn winning. Pass pawn, black's got a big advantage. So we have in the game, like this, giving up the exchange. Let me go back. Sorry. After rook b1, queen c2, rook f1, giving up the exchange. And you might think this is a crazy decision, but it was difficult. Queen c1, queen takes c5, at least for this pawn to try and get this pawn. But Nakamura plays f3 now, and this is extremely dangerous now. I don't believe white's in trouble here. He plays g3. If he played rook takes f3, then takes, this is just really good. That nasty pin now on the bishop. Doesn't really matter about the checks. They're going to be short-lived there. So white plays g3, and then we have queen e3, queen d5, h5, h4, king h7, queen g5, rook a7, and this rook is coming in, infiltrating here. Doesn't matter about taking there because that'll be two connected pass pawns. So white's pretty helpless here. We see rook a1, queen e7 check. There's a very nasty threat here. It looks as though this was like forking the rooks. But if we have a look at this position, I believe if takes, we just play rook takes f1 check. And then queen c1 is checkmate. So yeah, this rook is immune. So yeah, rook a1. Queen e7 check was played, king g8 check. King g7. These checks are just short-lived here. And white resigned in this position. So say queen g5, actually there's a really crushing move in this position. This, although it defends against that queen c1 idea, rook takes and queen c1, can you see what black has here, which is really killing? If I give you 5 seconds, black to play and win. A nice tactical test here for you. If I give you 5 seconds starting from now. Okay, queen e2. For example, c5, we have rook takes and then queen g2. This would be totally helpless, really, this position. So anyway, I'll take you to where the game ended. It was after rook f7, and if you want to see, there's another monkey there, unveiled behind me. I feel at home with monkeys, don't know why. But it is a major tourist attraction of Gibraltar, yeah. People really love them, but not so much the car owners, because sometimes they're not so easily insured against monkey business. Anyway, Hope you enjoyed this one. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.